Hello everyone. Let us start today's session, which is image processing fundamentals. And here we are going to discuss about like different sensors and fundamentals of image processing, and um, and how they are related with mobile robots and all is what we are going to discuss now. So let us talk about the realistic images, which are color images. They have majorly three components. One is red, green and blue, where in combination of all these three colors we can get colors like yellow, which is a combination of red and green, and cyan we can get it with uh, green and blue, and black we can get a combination of all colors. Magenta we will be getting it with red and blue. We can get white with a combination of RGB. So how these colors and how this RGB format is formed entirely depends upon the sensor. And so coming into image processing, we have a particular sequence. So we have an environmental scene which is sensed by a sensor. This sensor will give a data pertaining to environment, that is ultimately the RGB levels of the environment. And these environmental data is transferred onto a signal treatment, which is basically signal processing. There you can find masking, and you can attenuate certain levels of area of the scene, and certain things which you can actually treat, which is very essential for your feature extraction. In feature extraction, you can go with edge detection or a typical algorithm that is applied onto your treated signal, and we can get an interpretation of the complete scene using this feature extraction. So this is totally the intelligent part of any image processing, and this is processing part and this is the sensing part. So if we could divide this complete image processing sequence, one is sensing, other one is treatment or processing, last one is the intelligent part, which is your interpretation. So any typical image formation has two things. One is the geometry of an image and the physics of light. So the geometry of the image, which is basically an image plane where the projection is being located. This is basically the sensory area. So as the sensory area is large, or the number of the sensory elements that are more, you'll get a better geometry of an image. So the best example for this is the difference between a 720p camera and 1080p camera, 2K or a 4K and a high resolution images. And the second one relates all with the physics of the light. So how the illumination is there, whether it is a single source illumination or distributed illumination or a pointed illumination that is present on a particular thing. So better illumination, better will be the quality of the image formed. So geometry is entirely depends upon the sensor, and physics of the light depends upon what kind of light source that you're using. Generally, in better photography and better image perception, so we'll go with a distributed light where it is distributed throughout the entire area in a very good format. Especially professional photographers uses a typical dispersed light, which is very much distributed and gives better quality image. And if you could check how does the image is formed. So so this is eliminated. So the entire scene should be eliminated by a source. If there is no source, no elimination, so no image is captured. For the best example for this is, you cannot take a good quality image if the light is poor. So you require a good point source of illumination, or it could be a distributed source of illumination. So this illumination is transmitting your light quanta onto a surface, which is basically an object that has been under capturing. So you have an incident radiation. So incident radiation has an angle with a normal to the surface, which is called as angle of incidence. So this incidence is being reflected back onto your camera which is shooting the scene. So for better reception, you have a better reflectance surface image, so that you will get a better quality uh, uh, photograph. So this reflected beam is in the form of irradiance. So this irradiance is captured by the sensory element, and the sensory element will focus this onto your optical axis for capturing the image and further processing. So if you could check the entire process, the primary thing is your illumination, then your reflectance. So better the illumination, better will be the reflectance, and better will be the image that is captured. So generally all these sensory elements are in the form of arrays or a matrix, where it is connected onto a processing element, which is basically an image processor. Generally all your cameras doesn't have an image processor, it has only a converter. So the image processing is done by an intelligent element called as image processing unit. Generally your high definition cameras and your DSLR cameras have a typical unit which will process the images. So the best example can be your pinhole camera. Pinhole camera is an interpretation of how you actually capture the image. So in this case, you have one image plane, and your center of projection will be O, and this whole setup is in a axis X, Y, and Z, which is a 3D axis. And let us consider a plane of it, which is represented by a horizontal axis V and then the vertical axis U. A projected beam is having X, Y, Z. Let us say this point has to be projected on the image plane, which is called as PC. So how we interpret this thing? So straight rays of the light pass through the pinhole in the form of an inverted image. Why inverted image? It is typically the fundamental phenomena that happens when a point that is transferred onto a particular image plane, it gets inverted by its nature. And you have a principal axis that is exactly normal to that of this image plane. So let us go into the deeper math of this particular pinhole camera. So here the F is the focus, so that is inversely proportional to the principal axis, and U is a point where the projection happened, it is in the vertical form, and V is the horizontal part, and X and Y are the regions which are your the axis on which your plane is located, where ultimately we can determine what is U and V. Our ultimate aim is to determine what is the location of this point on this image plane. So that is this point, which is PC. So PC has two coordinates, one is U and V, which is equal to a focus into the X coordinate divided by the Z coordinate, which is the principal axis. In both the cases we have the principal coordinate axis, which is very essential in order to determine point U and V. So what is this focus? So how does this focus depends upon? Focus entirely depends upon is the distance, is the principal distance where you can get the clear point of this P that is projected on an image plane. So that is focus. So focus varies depends upon the distance from which the point is being focused. So if we convert this into a homogeneous coordinates, for the point PC, we'll get U, V, and W. W is something which I'll discuss in the later part, and U and V are the location. And for this, you have the X, Y, and Z coordinates, which are to be multiplied with a 3x3 matrix, which has the principal component of focus that pass diagonally. And W is the component which is called as the wavelength concept. So wavelength concept depends upon your intensity of the illumination that is being used, so which is fundamentally required when you are dealing with the illumination sources. If not, this component can be completely eliminated. And the next concept is camera optics. So till now what we have studied is all about like how your pinhole camera or a pinhole point is being transmitted onto an image plane. And why we get an inverted image is because the typical nature of your convex lens or a concave lens that is used for projecting your optical axis. So the aperture must be larger to the administered to administer more light into the camera sensor. So lens is placed in order to aperture to focus. That is you adjust this lens in order to get the clear image. Ultimately, we are adjusting the focus. So focus is nothing but the distance between the converging radiation of your object and the lens vertical axis, which will converge at a point. So that point is always termed as the focus. And V and U in this case is nothing but your object distance from the lens, as we have discussed in the previous concepts, which is U and V. So the same U and V are applied here, and V is the image distance to the lens. So when we are focusing the optical axis, or when we are focusing an object, ultimately two concepts that come into picture. So what kind of lens we have to use and what kind of focal distance we have to keep in order to get a clear image. So in order to get a clear image, everybody knows that the focus is the primary part. Uh, so you can observe one more point, which is the inverted image. Inverted image is because the radiations are converging and they are meeting at an inverted point. That's the reason we get an inverted image. So these are about the camera optics. Other concepts of camera optics would include what kind of lens that you use. If you are using a better quality lens, you can actually focus a better image which is at a more distance. So your focal length and U are having a correlation that is already shown here. So U is x by z, f into x by z, where f is the focus length, the length of the focus. Similarly, V is also having one direct correlation with the focal point, the focus, which is f into y by z. So all these three terms are interrelated. So you cannot skip any typical term out of these three for selecting your camera optics. So let us move on to the next slide. So what image information we should consider for selecting a typical camera? So the optical parameters of the lens is that is the typical length type and focal length and field of view. So in the previous thing, I forgot to tell you about the field of view. Field of view is the total length of the lens that it can focus an object. So more the field of the length, more the lens size, better will be the field of view. And photometric parameters that would include the type. What is the type of photometrics you are using? And intensity is directly dependent upon the light radiation. Direction of illumination, there are different types of illuminations. That is a directed illumination, that is without any typical what do you call uh, focusing. We project the light radiation onto an object, just like now what I'm doing is I'm just using a light source in order to focus onto my face to get a clear thing. You can visually see it. I'll just switch off the light radiation and just tell you. So what will happen? So now it is completely switched off. The light is switched off. The focus light is switched off. So you can see a lot of dark spots, dark regions, because the illumination is a directed illumination. And reflectant properties. So reflectant properties that would include like more or less, a lot of objects does not absorb light radiation, because so as you all know, in your plus 2 physics, you might have studied, only black bodies will absorb a lot of light when compared to lighter colored objects. So that is about the reflectant property. And geometric properties are the type of projections. So how you project your camera in order to get your clear image. First thing is type of projection. So what kind of projection you are using, a direct light focusing based projection, etc. Position and orientation of camera in space. So a camera has different orientations, different positions in an open 3D space in order to procure or in order to acquire an image. And perspective distortion introduced by image processing. This is the advanced part of this geometric parameters, which is in what perspective the distortions are introduced. For example, if you're not using a proper filtering, that will lead to a lot of distortion in the image processing. For example, most of you guys might have faced red eyes that are present in most of the images. So if you use a red eye filter, that can be completely eliminated. So that is one typical geometric parameter. So let us check what is the processing scheme. Image processing scheme is a continuous process where you have an environment. So from the environment you capture an image through a camera. So initially the first part goes to the computer conditioning. So the computer conditioning or simple conditioning is to eliminate the basic fundamental things like distortions that are present in the environment. For example, dark spots, black spots, and then uneven illumination that is present within the image. So after this stage, so the simplified image is being transferred onto a labeling or grouping thing. So that means a group of pixels are grouped together in order to concentrate upon the area that you can work upon. So in conditioning phase, the fundamental tools that are used are thresholding and then edge detection and filtering. All these are very simple operations. So in the later stage, we have connected component labeling. For example, there are two coins that are present which you want to detect using image processing. So what is the connection between those two? It could be a typical edge part that is very common in both the coins, and then you have some typical transformations that are applied onto both in order to correlate. So the image correlation is also one typical thing that happens in a second phase, where you have some group of pixels that are having common concepts. In the later stage, it is extracting. So extracting is the difference. So you have one coin that has been compared with another coin. For example, you take a minting process. So in a minting process, no two coins should have what do you call any distortions or any changes. So both the coins should look like the same. In this process, you can apply a simple correlation using some typical simple transformation technique in order to correlate both the coins, especially in terms of shape, size, and type of emblem on it. And if there is any disparity, so it will try to match with the model. If there is any disparity that occurs, so it will again apply a cognitive action on the environment. It will, so it could, the cognitive action in case of minting could be reorienting an object and checking the possible matchings. So this image processing scheme will be more or less like common in all the cases. And in some certain advanced cases, some more elements are added in case of like matching, etc. So this matching model could be an AI process. So that is generally existing in a advanced version of the same schema. So we'll go to the next part. So let us talk about the concept C. Now we have seen the scheme, and then we'll talk about the light now. So why light is very much important? Because it is the source for illumination. So you have to work upon this element. So we have a typical wavelength, which is visible light. Only visible light is used for fundamental image processing. For advanced image processing, you can go with different types of lights, any of these lights. That depends upon the application again. So the wavelength would be around like 400 to 700 nanometers. So that is about the range. So in this range, you have at 400 you have violet and blue, and 500 you have some green, and then yellow color, and 600 and the red. Red is having the highest wavelength. That's the reason it is used mostly on the indicative purposes. So it can reach the maximum distance. So before that, we have gamma rays, that is around like 10 to the power of minus 12 meters. And then you have X-rays at 10 to the power of minus 10, and then UV rays at 10 to the power of minus 8, and you have microwaves in the order of 10 to the power of minus 4 to 1, and then the latest stage is basically a radio wave frequency. So we are not talking about this, we are limiting it to this radio wave frequency. So before whatever is the light source we have, so we'll study about that. So what is a short wave? Short wave is like very shorter in wavelength, and then it is basically it has the highest power capacity. It can transfer through any typical solid body. Example for this is an X-ray. So here there's one typical X-ray that is present here, and it is of a hand X-ray, so you can visualize any distortion that happens in the bones, let it be a breakage or a airline breakage, etc. So it can penetrate to a significant volume of material, especially it can penetrate through like soft tissues, which is the fundamental thing in an X-ray based thing. So this you can apply in case of like detection, like bomb squad detection robot. And let us talk about the next part, which is a longer wavelength, which is infrared. So these things are very essential in order to quantify some auspicious things that are emitted, especially if the best example that is given, which now the world is threatened by one typical virus, that is COVID-19. So you can test the fundamental thing, whether the body temperature of a person is high or not, through a non-contact technique. So non-contact technique is very much essential nowadays, because this disease is very contagious. So so these quantities can be typically on the pyrometry principle. So the pyrometry, most of you guys know, that is emission of radiation through which you can estimate the temperature of an object. And then something called as SAR, which is synthetic aperture radar, which is generally used in microwave probes for uh, uh, for for various purposes. For example, if you are using a helicopter to track where is the location of the enemies and all, so you can use a synthetic aperture radar technique, which is basically a radio microwave. It's a microwave, it's not a radio, it's a microwave. So using this technique you can do different things like weather conditioning, weather conditions that are there and existed in a particular area, particular region. And then you can use surface of a planet. And the next thing is range image. Range images are generally used in submarines for determining an object. And these range images are very much crucial in case when you want to determine a huge underwater rock. So the typical thing application part is a sonar or a laser rangefinder. And some more sonic images that are procured by an ultrasound frequency. So here in the example, some baby scan was present, which is also very crucial in case of typical applications like this. So it is produced by a reflected sound wave when it hits an object. So it also penetrates through certain volume of a tissue or certain volume of a material. Now we'll talk about the sensors that are associated in order to produce all these images. So the first one is CCD camera, which is very much popular. So it has tiny solid state cells, which are very low level sensors that are arranged in a matrix form. So this will convert into an electric charge. So this electric charge depends upon the intensity of an object. For example, darker objects will have lesser intensity, lesser charge ultimately, and lighter images will have more charge, and vice versa. So both the things are possible based on the potential that is being used. So here in the figure you can visualize there is a 3D scene, and it is passed onto a lens and projected onto a sensor. This is your total sensor. So this sensor has some rows and some columns which are assigned, and you can visualize this inverted image here because of this lens impact. And this is the pixel region, which is in the micro level. Here the primary thing is, how does the scan happen? So scan is very simultaneous process. It happens both in horizontal and vertical directions in like one flash. Like the minimum time that is required in case of charge coupled devices, which will be in terms of nano to millisecond. And how this data is transferred onto your frame grabber. Let us talk about this frame buffer or frame grabber in the later part. So we have a row and a column. For example, this region, you can imagine this has been projected here. So this particular pixel has the intensity regions that are varying. So we have a darker object here, let us say. So this region is darker, so darker object is present here. It has some intensity level which is directly proportional to the charge. So this charge data is converted into a frame buffer. That is, your frame buffer will tell you the charge levels at individual pixels. So why is this synchronization required? Synchronization is required when you want to read a continuous rows and columns in like one flash, one go. And this data is provided onto a frame buffer. After this frame buffer, your actual signal processing will start. This is all about your CCD devices. CCD devices are basically analog devices which are used in case of your security cameras. And then the biggest problem for this is, since it is analog signal, so you require a digitization after this frame. After when you capture a frame, some digitization is required in order to process your signal. So let us move on to the next part. What is this frame grabber and how does it is very essential in case of what do you call a CC camera? So CC camera, the frame grabber is actually a board or a simple PCB unit which will digitize your signal and it will store onto your PC. That is what I said in the previous part. So after this you require a digital conversion. So that happens with a CCD, that is CCD based frame grabber. So it depends upon again the memory, how better is your memory. So you can visualize all these things here. You have a 3D scene. It is passed onto lens, projected onto your sensor, which is your CCD array. After this, your A to D conversion happens onto your frame buffer. That is because of this, what do you call, the frame grabber. So this frame grabber or a buffer will actually pushes the data onto an algorithm or a display or a graphical unit for processing it. So this frame buffer, without this frame buffer, whatever we get the data which is in analog form. So we'll talk about image digitizations, which is this process, that is analog to digital conversion process. Why we require digitization? Digitization is very much required when you want when you want the data that is processed, that has to be processed with a computer. And a computer, you are aware that the computer processes only a digital signal. So the fundamentals of this digitization is in order to convert an analog sensory data into a digital data for further processing. So this would include sampling. Sampling is nothing but you measure a finite number of points within an image. For example, I don't require the rest of the region. I want to measure the human location within a region. So I don't want any typical regions for this. So I sample the data only in this region. In this region is sampled. So the rest of the data is forwarded to trash. So you don't require any points that are in this particular region. So that is all about sampling. So this sampling is very much essential because your frame grabber will give you a continuous data which is not required for processing. So only a particular part of it is required. So you just eliminate or you just lower the number of frames that are used for processing for a better and a quicker output. So the next part is quantization. Quantization is like you are representing one typical measured value that is sampled by your sampling unit. So that is in terms of a typical integer. If you are just in an integer format, if you are showing, that is quantization. So you quantize the element but in a particular array of pixels or a set of pixels. So quantization is nothing but you just limit up the values with a simple sampled integer. Excuse me. So you can see the rows and columns. So this particular thing is required. So there are rows and columns. So one sample of columns I have taken. So in this one particular pixel, I'll just use this line spacing in order to get a typical grayscale value, which will vary from 0 to 24. Where 0 stands with the pure white and 255 stands with the maximum intensity of black. More the black, more will be the intensity. So each pixel will have all these ranges. The best example for quantization is initially it was 256 gray levels that is converted to 32 gray levels, which is less quality image, and then to 16 gray levels. If we just further go, it will go to a lesser thing. So quantization is it will reduce the data in order to have a quicker processing. So that's all about quantization. So for example, you have an original image and it is sampled by a factor of, let us say, 2. So we have this image, and we are sampling by a factor of 4, we'll get this image. If we are sampling by a factor of 8, we'll get this image. So let us have the difference. So if the factor of sampling is more, you'll get a better quality image. If the sampling is very, very less, you'll get a poorer quality image. So more of the data is missing here. It was somewhat less in this case, and it was somewhat okay in this case. So sampling has to be more and more. Your buffer or the memory that is required for sampling also goes more. Both are directly proportional to each other. So once you have the basics of all these things, so some fundamental very common image file formats that are used for image processing is GIF, which you know very much, PNG, which is a shorter form, which is portable network graphics, which is very, very low quality image at lesser memory space, JPEG, and then TFF, PGM, then FITS. These are some common formats which are used for image processing. So let us stop this lecture here, and then we'll start with the image processing techniques in the next video.